Hi, my name is Luna, and welcome to my channel. Or if you're continuing to watch all the videos that I posted today, I'm glad you're still here. I feel like I have spent most of the day talking at the camera at this point, but we're about to dive into something also big, which is my story of like why I'm here, how I got started on this path, what this path means to me, and where I plan on going from here on out. So that you guys get to really know like a little bit about who I am. So I started this path when I was 13 years old. I had a couple of those little like moments where I had kind of like looked back on it later and been like, oh, well, it perfectly makes sense that I would be pagan now. For example, like when I was really little, like 6 or 7, maybe even 8 at this point, I had gone into my school library and I had taken out this book, and it was a book of spells, and it was real thin book of spells, and it talked about, you know, how to overcome your fear, how to deal with anger, little spells like, you know, nailing a nail into a board, and, you know, setting intention, things like that. Things that, you know, my 6 or 7-year-old self didn't really notice, but I remember taking out this book of spells and from the library and then returning it a couple of weeks later, like I think 2 weeks later, after I had looked over it and held on to it for a little while, and I'd never seen it again. I went to look for it, you know, 2 years later, and I looked for it in the library, and I'm not sure if, you know, somebody had taken it out, or like if it had gotten thrown away, or, you know, what happened to this book. But it was one of those moments where I had this book of spells in my hand and I felt really drawn towards it. It was something that I'd really wanted when I was younger, something that had piqued my interest. And then flash forward a couple of years later, you know, I'm 13 years old, I'm online. At this point, I had gone on vacation to my family in Florida. I have some family up in Pennsylvania, and I have some family in Florida. My mom's side of the family is in Florida. So I had gotten, as a birthday gift, a plane ticket to ride down there by myself and spend the week with them. While I was down there, I met one of my cousins who happened to be vegan at the time, and it was one of those, like, I was 13, I was still exploring, you know, who I was trying to figure things out, and I'd come back to my parents' great surprise, I had come back both goth, because I had learned what Hot Topic was, and they had introduced me to that style of dressing, and that was a huge thing for my path, and kind of still is. I still very much dress goth when I'm, like, going out, things like that. And it's something that I have continued to this day, and that's like 13 years later. But I had also come back vegan, which my parents didn't know what to do with. We lived in a really small town. We didn't really have that many things available to us as far as grocery stores go, so it was kind of like we had what was close by, and by close by I mean my grocery store was half an hour away. So it's not like I really had that great of an opportunity to really explore that, but I stayed vegetarian on and off for about 3 years before just giving it up entirely, because it was just a really hard diet to maintain with very little resources around me. I didn't have any of like the fancy grocery stores that a lot of people in like metropolitan and suburban areas have. So it was something that I still very strongly believed, that I didn't want to hurt animals and that I didn't want to eat animals, but it was something that I'd kind of made my peace with, that I was going to be an omnivore at that point. When I was 13, I was in a lot of like chat rooms and things like that, and I had started a pen palship with somebody from Australia who also happened to be vegan. That's how we met. We met through like a vegan correspondence thing, and we were emailing back and forth, you know, getting to know each other on these very opposite sides of the world. And she had mentioned in one of her emails that she was Wiccan. And I was like, I've never heard of this. What is this? And, you know, she started to explain it to me in one of the emails, and I had done a lot of research on it by myself. I had, you know, visited a lot of websites, and eventually started to glean out like really what Wicca was, and, you know, what it meant. And it was definitely this like this coming home moment, this, oh my god, I understand, you know, everything in the universe just all of a sudden made sense to me. And I was like, I am not alone in thinking, you know, all these things that I've kind of thought over the years. And I was like, this is something that really resonates with me. So I had lost touch with the girl that I was corresponding with, but I had continued to research Wicca for the next, well, till like now, basically, for the next 13 years. And I had found Silver Ravenwolf's book, Teen Witch, or like, it was Solitary Guide. No, it wasn't Solitary Guide. It was Solitary Witch, which was the really big book, and also Teen Witch, and, you know, To Ride a Silver Broomstick. And she was the one that I had first really found, because her books were also in the teen, like, non-fiction section at the bookstores that I went to. And one of the biggest influences in my path was Gloria Faria Stolers's Blue is for Nightmares series. It's about a girl who goes to a boarding school and she solves mysteries while using witchcraft. And it wasn't seen as bad in this book. It was just something that she was, and it was something that she believed in. And that book really shaped a lot of the things that I came to believe. It's the way that I practice. I practice a very low magic kind of practice. It's not ceremonial much at all. And it's because of that book, because she used what she had. You know, she was in a dorm room. She had like limited access to things, and I came from a small town where I also had limited access to things, so that really made an impact on me, and it really shaped the way that I basically see the world. This book changed my life that much. But I kept reading. I eventually moved on to like Ellen Dugan's books, and trying to think, Diane Sylvan's The Circle Within, and Scott Cunningham's Guide to a Solitary or Wicca, The Guide for the Solitary Practitioner. Books like that really, like, I kept reading, and a lot of what I had understood at that point was there's a lot of meaning in all of these things, and I didn't really understand that there's more than one way to do things, and a lot of things can be really intuitive. And a couple of years later, I'd found Kimmy, Autumn Star Moon, and then later The Lovely Little Witch. I found her videos, and she was a cottage witch, and she practiced low magic like me, and, you know, she lived out in the country, and she wanted to be a homesteader, and she was somebody that I really looked up to because she was so much like me. She really resonated with that part of my soul that was like, you don't need to, you know, dress up in robes and have all these things. You should live a very, like, minimalist life, and you should use what you have. And that really resonated with me very strongly, to the point where a couple of years after that, had taken a year and a day, which I had gotten through about 6 months of before she just stopped doing them. And then later I had taken another year and a day, which, again, we never actually finished the year and a day, but it was just amazing to study under her. She was an amazing person. She's an amazing human being. I still sometimes keep in contact with her today. It's very rare now, just because she doesn't really correspond with anybody anymore. That she's not, like, you know, super close to, and she lives in Texas and I live in Pennsylvania, and we never really got to meet. But she to this day is somebody that I very much look up to, and very much I want to live my life like, because I feel like it's important to do that. And she really taught me to follow my own truth, to really ignore what everybody else was saying, and to really go within and find those answers within myself. And I know how to practice. I've read enough books that I understand the ways in which paganism should work. I understand, you know, the concepts. I understand what the full moon means. I understand how to do an Esbit. I understand how to, you know, celebrate, you know, a Sabbat, and what all the different ones on the wheel mean. And, you know, I've looked into these things, but there was a lot of big stopping points in my practice where I would just get stuck on things. Like, I thought, you know, I used to write down hundreds of lists hundreds of lists of correspondences, just over and over and over again, until I realized that if you pull from enough sources, everything means everything. Like, if you look at enough sources for the colors, for example, red will eventually mean everything. It can stand for blood, it can stand for life, it can stand for love, it can stand for anger, it can stand for, all of these things. But you really have to decide for yourself what that means. And that's something that I've known for a couple of years now, but was afraid to practice. Mostly because I came from a household where Wicca wasn't really accepted. My mom barely understood what it was. I told her when I was 13, this is really what I want to be, and she was like, fine, but you can't give up God. You can't, stop going to church. You can't stop doing these things. Even though we weren't really a big church-going family, she had made me take CAD classes just to make sure that I would be, like, saved. I never finished the CAD classes because I argued with the teacher over, like, false idols and things like that. So I had a problem with really believing what they were teaching inside of the churches, and really, like, railing against that at that point in my life, because I wanted to believe in something different. But at the same time, I went through that same struggle that most people who come from Christian backgrounds moving to paganism do, where for a couple of years I had a problem where I really thought that I was going to hell, and I had issues where, like, I think I watched the movie Saved for, like, 2 months straight, because I really wanted to fall in love with Christianity, and I really wanted to be, a good person, and I didn't want to go to hell, and I didn't think that paganism would lead me to hell, but there was still that fear in the back of my mind where if I gave up Christianity and it ended up being the wrong religion, that I may go to hell, and that was something that I would have to live with, for eternity, and that scared me. And I've gotten past those thoughts a lot now, and I've realized, a lot more since then, because I've grown and I've matured, but there was still that fear very early on in my practice where I really wasn't sure, and I'm trying to think, like, where I'm going after this. And also, like, while I was taking CAD classes, my dad and I had gotten into a lot of fights. My dad and I had a really rough time while I was growing up, because my dad was very angry about a lot of things that really had nothing to do with me. It was just he was dealing with his own depression and his own anger and a lot of things. But he was very aggressive, and he would very, very much pick fights in my household. And I remember one trip back from, I think we were at my aunt and uncle's at that point, who had lived about an hour away, and the topic had come up of me being pagan, and at that time I was going by the term Wiccan, because I didn't really identify with pagan until much later in my practice, but that's neither here nor there. He was going to throw me out of the car and make me walk the rest of the way home. We were about 15 minutes out at this point by car, and he was going to make me walk the rest of the way home so that he didn't have to be in a car with a Satanist, because that's what he thought that I was, because I dressed like a goth, and because I was into Wicca. But I didn't confuse Wicca with Satanism. He just believed that anybody who didn't believe in God, in Christ, that they were going to hell, and that they weren't good people. And even though he wasn't a very religious man himself, I still very clearly remember that conversation where he was going to throw me out of the car because he called me a Satanist. And I realized that I wasn't really accepted by my family, and a large part of my family doesn't even know my background with spirituality at this point, because that was my first real experience telling somebody other than my mother, and it had gone so poorly. So there was that kind of hardship growing up, where for a lot of the time I was very closeted, and I didn't practice as much as I should have. Like, I did, I think, like 4 spells the entire time I was at home at that point, still in middle school, still in high school, and I remember one night very clearly when I was still struggling with the whole, like, am I gonna go to hell Christianity debate, and I remember, like, leaning up over my headboard, looking out the window at the moon, and I was crying my eyes out because I had just broken up with my boyfriend at the time, and it was my first serious breakup, and I put my hands together and I bowed my head and I said, please God, please, if you are real, send me a sign, make the pain go away, like, make it better, and I will be a good Christian and I will believe all these things. And at that point, I had sunk into a depression that lasted me about another 3 years, and the pain didn't go away for a very long time. And that was kind of why I shied away from Christianity, because I was like, that was my dark night of the soul. That was my am I going to continue to believe the Christian teachings, or am I going to follow this path of paganism? And I really felt like it was laid out for me at that point that I had to follow the path of paganism, because there really was no other option for me. Realistically, I was supposed to end up here. And that was really that turning point for me. So I had done a couple of rituals after that, at that point, and like only a handful, like 4 or 5, because usually my parents were home a lot and bothered me, and I never really had time to myself to be able to, do these things and work on these practices. And I didn't at that point really understand the importance of doing the groundwork, like literally grounding and centering and raising energy and visualization and meditation and all the things that they preach to you in the books that you really should be doing and that are really the basis of everything else. I didn't understand that at the time, how important that was. I was like, oh, well, I'm good at visualization, or, oh, like, I don't really need to practice grounding because when I need it, I'll just be able to do it, and I already know how to raise energy because I am a psychic vampire, and, like, I understood the process of energy raising and energy drawing and things like that. Like, I understood all of that stuff mentally, because I had read all of these books and I had heard these things echoed, over and over and over again, that this is the way that things worked. So if you read something enough times, you eventually believe that you can do it. Like, if you read about swimming enough times, you think you know how to do it. You think you know how it's going to feel. But what I'm learning very recently in my Intuitive Badass class and all the things that I'm doing this year for my year and a day is that just because you've read how to swim and you've read, 600 books on how to swim doesn't mean you know what it feels like when you're going to hit that water. And that's really where I'm coming into now in my practice, is I've wanted to do all of these things for so long, and I thought that I knew all of this stuff, and I have all of this book knowledge. Like, I can carry on a very educated conversation with somebody, but I don't know how it feels. I don't know what it feels like to do a ritual. I don't know what it feels like to look at the phases of the moon. I don't know what it feels like to really be pagan, other than like ethically. I've considered myself pagan because I believe a lot of the things that they teach, and I believe the book reading of what I've done, but I've never really considered myself a witch. Like, I like to use the term, but I've never practiced magic, which is a large reason why my channel is around the word does, because that is my word of the year. The word does is really important to me because it is just an action word. It is a word that says, hey, you're going to stop thinking about doing this and you're going to do it. So Luna Does Magic is the overarching theme of me being able to do all of the things that I've wanted to do for so long. It's me learning all of these techniques instead of just reading about them. At this point in my path, I am learning about reclaiming Wicca. Reclaiming witchcraft is really a big component of what I'm learning, because while I was doing all of this studying, I had stumbled across like fairy tradition and their use of the iron and pearl pentacle and things like that. And it was something that really resonated with my path, and it was amazed to find out that this reclaiming tradition was using the same thing, because there were some things in fairy that I didn't agree with, but I really liked the use of the iron and the pearl pentacle. So when reclaiming used it, I was like, wow, this is something that I absolutely want to do. And it kind of like fell into my lap. It was one of those moments where everything just kind of like came together. I was watching Cute Witch 772's videos where she is talking a lot about reclaiming witchcraft, and I was talking to her about it, and she recommended Baltimore Reclaiming. And I'm going to end up taking a class in June called Elements of Magic, which is like the first class that you have to take to be able to take a lot of the other classes through that tradition. And I'm really going to get to feel out for the first time if that is the tradition that's meant for me, because that was the other thing that I struggled with a lot in my path, was trying to figure out what tradition that I was going to do, because I didn't want to learn all of these things if my other tradition was going to teach me a different way, which was another reason why I stopped for a long time, other than going to college and not really having access to a lot of time, and b all the things that I should have been doing all along, because I thought that I knew them because of reading the books. So reclaiming is a huge one for me. It's really coloring a lot of my learning right now, a lot of my perspectives, and trying to keep an open mind to other things in case that jumps out at me as well. There's a blog post that I wrote about flirting with spirituality, where I'm kind of dating all of these different paths. I'm like dating Celtic Reconstructionism. I'm dating Druidry to see if that resonates with me the most. I'm dating Asatru, which doesn't really seem to be resonating with me a lot. I really like the Norse and Scandinavian countries, but I really don't like Asatru as a religion, especially because it's been kind of tainted for me with the whole white supremacy thing. It's not really what I'm after. So there's that, and then anything Scottish I'm really into. Really into. And if you have any other questions about this really long video, please feel free to leave them in the bottom. If there's anything that I missed, I'll try to fill you guys in. But I think that's all I really have to say about where I was and then where I'm at now as far as my practice goes. I've been learning a ton over the past 2 months, like a metric ton, like you've seen my binders, of things that I want to work on, and I'm really getting my hands dirty. One of the things that the Intuitive Badass class is teaching me is basically how to start a daily practice, and it started out with just grounding every day and journaling and doing yoga, which I added in myself, and these are things that I wanted to do anyway, and I'm getting so much more out of it than I thought that I would, and I'm realizing that I'm really starting at ground zero, even though I know a lot of the things that I should know. So that's kind of where I'm at and a little bit about who I am. If you want to know other random facts about me, please check out my 25 Facts About Me video. That'll give you a little bit more insight into who I am as a practitioner and just as a person. But I think that's all I really have to say. I think that there is one more video that I'm going to make, and I am going to take a little bit of time to sit with that energy, because it's a really hard video for me to make. It's something that got brought up really recently in my course that I'm taking, and it's something that really needs to be said, and it's something that I need to come to terms with. So look out for that, and I'll talk to you guys later. Okay? Have a good day, and goodbye.